Well, welcome. I am going to be speaking to the topic of how modern women have failed the three generations that have followed since the modern woman era began. And perhaps to begin today's session, I will like to use someone as an archetype to put across a position that I would hope will be received favorably, especially amongst women. The archetype that I will be using is Jennifer Aniston, someone who for the past 30 years has been celebrated amongst women. One of the big stars from the TV series Friends, but more importantly, someone who played a pivotal role in modern women's decline, in my opinion, more so than any other woman. As a matter of fact, I personally think that without realizing the damage that the hit TV series Friends did to the psyche of both men and women was immeasurable. But let me be more specific on today's conversation. About 2 weeks ago, Jennifer Aniston, who is in her 50s, she's 53 this year, she released an interview which she had done with a buddy that she had some, I guess, trust and good rapport with. In the interview, she made some statements, but one of the statements that caught the attention of most modern women was her reference to the struggle she had with regards to IVF and actually having a baby. I waited for 2 weeks intentionally to give myself time to see whether other women would support her position, or whether there will be perhaps a balanced critique of Jennifer Aniston's statements. Let me start by saying this. I'm not speaking to Jennifer herself. I'm speaking through Jennifer as an archetype. And I do so because to be a celebrity means to have arrived at a place where you're celebrated for something you have achieved. I take nothing away from her achievements. But when you get to a level of celebration in life, what tends to happen is you become a role model, and other people emulate and seek to emulate the path that you have walked or the life that you have led. And so, for those who become icons and strong role models, your responsibility transcends yourself, your immediate family, your loved ones, but more importantly, it goes beyond that to those who might be following your path without understanding the struggles that you had to go through. At 53, first of all, I think it was too late for Jennifer to come out and release the news that she had tried for so many years without success to conceive a child. She began this process in her very late 30s, and this continued and has continued until present time. So you could say, give or take, it has taken her almost 15 years of trying. I have a number of issues with Jennifer's statements. I acknowledge her struggles, I acknowledge her pain, but I have a number of issues, and the issues I'm going to identify, I hope I'm able to put those issues across coherently for the purpose of the generation of women who are to come or who have looked up to Jennifer for many years. And let me begin by saying this. If you go through what we use as a classification for the various generations since the turn of the century, the Great Generation, the Silent Generation, the Baby Boomers, Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z. The Great Generation and the generation that we call Silent Generation, which were the ones who actually got to see the World War, early 20s to about the mid-40s, the Silent Generation were esteemed in so high regard because of what they achieved, the sacrifices they made, both men and women, but the sacrifices they made to make it possible for you and I to be able to come together and communicate in person. Their sacrifices were immeasurable. As a result of the sacrifices that they went through, the generation that followed, the baby boomers, for some reason, decided to go away from and to choose a different path to how things had been done for centuries. The liberal laws came into play in the early 50s, particularly in the 60s, 1960s in the West. We saw the advent and the introduction and the adoption of the womanist feminist ideologies, a combination of both the liberal ideas, the feminist and womanist ideals, the need to forge a new path, the breakdown and the rejection of our core values, the values that have supported and strengthened and made the West what it still is, though in fractions. We saw some of these values thrown away. We started to experiment. And what we are seeing today, and if I use Jennifer's case as an example, is what happens when the chicken comes home to roost. What we have is the baby boomer generation, who I personally hold very responsible for a lot of the damage that has been done to the social fabric of society. And most of the regret that we see in society today, the damage, has come from that generation. These were the generations who were born post the Second World War. This was the generation who had seen their parents suffer, but didn't suffer as much as their parents, but were lucky enough that the technologies and transformations and sacrifices that their parents and forefathers made came to fruition. And therefore they were exposed to less suffering, less pain. They were taken away from what I call the bottom of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And people started pursuing self-actualization, pursuing things that didn't concern itself with food, shelter, clothing, the basic needs that most people in the rest of the world have. So the experimentation began. Usually what happens when food, shelter, clothing have been met is we move into sex, pleasure, self-interest, and we started to see the experimentation from the baby boomer generation. All of the ideals and ideas that founded the West, the Judeo-Christian values, Western civilization, the Enlightenment, all of the things that made the West very special and unique were thrown away to the side. Now, there were things that were definitely in need of being perhaps modified. But to throw the baby away with the bath water was a mistake that was made. But in any case, what we found was the baby boom generation leading into Generation X became the most selfish generation prior to Generation Y and Generation Z. But what we've seen is that the three generations that follow the baby boom generation, Gen X, Gen Y, and Gen Z, have been failed in the fact that most, especially women in this case, have not been provided with the nurturing, the wisdom, the discernment, the judgment that other women have passed down. In many ways, the baby boom generation simply said, thank you very much, silent generation. Thank you very much, the great generation. Thank you very much, our forefathers. But we can take it from here. And all that wisdom and knowledge wasn't passed down. Therefore, the principle and the promise which says, the sins of the fathers shall visit the children, even up until the third and fourth generation, is what we're seeing today. Now, you might be thinking, well, what does this have to do with Jennifer Aniston? Well, I'll get there. Again, Jennifer has been used as an archetype. I have no ill intentions towards her as a person. I have reservations in her naivety, in her stubbornness, and in a failure to understand the significance of her words to most women who are either Generation X and Generation Y. Now, Gen Z are still relatively young, and they didn't bond with the Jennifer Aniston Friends movement as much. In any case, Generation Z are the offsprings of the same women who created the Jennifer Anistons of the world. Now, why do I raise this as a talking point? And doesn't it feel strange that a man is the one talking about such matters? Well, over the past 40, 50 years, what we have found is the attack on the family structure, so much so that most fathers are not in most households. A family is now made up of whatever we decide a family should be. Structure, discipline, delayed gratification, focus, the person who gets to remind you of history, heritage, as family sacrifices, the person who gets to give you an identity, a picture that you can hold on to in the difficult times, has been removed from most families. So today, most people are being raised either in single parent families or being raised in families where the men or the fathers were also raised by a lot of the women from the baby boom generation who embraced the feminist womanist ideology, who had an issue with men and therefore raised their sons to become feminine or female, meant to be to have the hardware of men but also the software of women. And therefore what you found is that most people who were raised after the baby boom generation did not have the structure, did not have the foundations, did not have what I call the house built on the rocks. You see this more so in the West. In modern West, we've seen a disintegration of everything that makes us social creatures. In any case, I digress. So let me come back to the Jennifer Anistons interview and the issue I have with that conversation. Number one, I saw some of the statements she made from the interview. She categorically stated that she had no regrets. Anybody who has any emotions could tell that she was regretful of the fact that at 53, she doesn't have a family. The failure in not saying, I made a mistake, and let me speak, since I cannot change the errors of my ways, I'm going to invest my life into the lives of the younger people by saying what needs to be said. What needs to be said should be, there are certain decisions that need to be considered at an early age. The consideration should not be binary, should not be A or B, but it should consider the likelihood of A or B, or A and B, or neither. This simply means that the game of chance and the game of odds are not synonymous. Most women these days, young women, modern women, have been raised to believe that for some reason, motherhood is a curse. They've been raised to believe that there is something more intrinsically valuable from work, a job, a career, which very few people have. Most people have jobs. Few people have careers, and even few people have callings and purposes and passions. But modern women have been raised to think that the most important thing they can achieve or do as women is anything but motherhood, anything but starting a family, and that the decision of a family should be left until the last minute. We've been taught through women that chance and luck is something to hold on to rather than odds. Now this brings me to the concept of what I call the 3P test. The 3P test has 3 words: possibility, plausibility, and probability. 3 words. They're not all synonymous, they're not the same. There are some things that are possible, which means that it can happen. There is a chance that it can happen. There are other things that are plausible, which implies that should it happen, then it will be good. It will be recognized, it will be acknowledged. But there are other things that are probable. Possibility deals with luck. Plausibility deals with chance. Probability deals with odds. And women need to be taught the importance of understanding the game of odds, especially when it comes to nature. Never in human history have we had a group of women be so against nature and biology. So much so that even when 30 years has passed and we have the outcomes, which would have been predictable in hindsight, women refuse to acknowledge that yes, it's perfectly acceptable to have regrets. Regrets is often the starting point of saying, listen, my best wasn't good enough. And if I had to do it all over again, I would do it differently. Now, Jennifer in her interview made reference to the fact that the one thing she would have done differently would have been that she would have listened to those who informed her of the importance of the IVF treatment earlier. In other words, ignore nature, ignore your biology, freeze your eggs so that you have a higher possibility of conceiving whenever you are ready. She didn't make reference to the fact that she should have actually started motherhood early enough. She said, she would have wanted to have had the opportunity to have started the IVF process earlier. In other words, almost a spit in the face of nature. In other words, saying nature had it wrong. Technology, innovation, and medical advances had it right. The reason I don't have a child today and I'm not a mother is because I wasn't aware of the advances in medicine early enough. Had I known, I would have frozen my eggs, which would have given me a higher possibility of success when I was ready. In my experience, and this experience is not one that can be limited to anecdotal experiences alone, but in my experience and in my interaction with so many people, but more importantly, when you look at the data, the facts, the statistics, and the logical inferences, IVF treatment is given more credit than it deserves. Way more credit. Today you have young women in their 20s, early 20s, saying IVF. You have women who've just been emancipated at 18, 19, saying IVF. Without realizing that at 18, you still have 15 years to allow nature to do what it does best, which is to give you naturally what you already have and assist you in the process of bringing to the world a new life. The idea that young women have been brainwashed into believing that the right approach, should they decide to, will be IVF rather than natural birth, rather than natural insemination, goes a long way to show you how much the marketing industry, the media industry, the sales industry has weaponized and taken advantage of the fears, concerns, worries that women have. And whenever there is an opportunity for money to be made, people will exploit it. And what we see through Jennifer Aniston's conversation is how much, and deep down in the subconscious state, that level of brainwashing and how far it has gone. Not one regret. She had the opportunity at 50 plus to say, listen, young girls, take it from me. I made a few mistakes. I believed that my career was more important. I believed that my dreams and goals, and I have to be very careful in saying this, my dreams and goals with regards to a job or a career were more important. I believed that my freedom, being an individual, was more important than motherhood. Now understand, it's not my place to tell you which is more or less important. It's a trade-off. I should say this. The choices that we make will always come with constraints, costs, consequences, and trade-offs. There are no solutions. The mistake that modern women have been making, and what is being sold to modern women, is that there is a trade-off. That there is a solution rather than a trade-off. Young women have been told the solution is IVF. And when you're ready, IVF will be the answer. A lot of these women, young, naive, without someone guiding them, without any authority in their lives, no fathers present, or even when there are fathers, weak fathers, no one is teaching them how to think inductively and deductively. No one is teaching them how to think long-term and short-term. No one is encouraging them to understand the concept of asymmetry in risks, that some risks are negatively skewed on the asymmetric side, and some are positively skewed on the asymmetric side, and that life, when you're making decisions, is all about understanding whether the benefits outweigh the risks and whether the skewness of the distribution Is left leaning or right leaning? Is it negatively or positively skewed? That concept is so important because there are certain decisions that we know that we will have to make. And even if we are wrong in such decisions, the outcome, even when negative, may not be too consequential. Now, there are others, we know, that if we get it wrong, the outcomes, the effects, could be too heavy for us to bear. Getting to 50 years and being a single woman, being unmarried, having no kids, but having had the opportunity to have had everything you wanted, having been the media darling for 20 plus years, and to have missed out on the opportunity to have what most people consider as more important than anything, which is the loved ones you have, the friends, the relationships that you surround yourself with. Having none of that after 20 years of your peak potential, finally accepting that maybe it's not going to happen, but refusing to then take that life and invest that life in the right way, with the right words, in younger women to say, listen, chase your dreams, but understand you have a short window of opportunity and that you cannot and you should not believe in solutions alone whenever you're going against Mother Nature or when you're going against biology. On that basis, I think Jennifer has done more harm with her words than she realizes. Now, I waited for 2 weeks just to see if there will be other women who come forward and say, perhaps we got it wrong, and perhaps our feminist mentors and people who inspired us on this path got it wrong. Not one. I have seen, and to give you a good example, on some of the tabloids and newspapers, we've had 4, 5, 6 different women write in the same tabloid about the same topic and about the same interview. A few of them have talked about how they went through the same experience. Not one of them made reference to the fact that perhaps the philosophy was wrong and therefore the actions are consistent with the philosophy installed in them, but that it was important for younger women to change course and to change direction and not follow the same mistakes that they had made. Not one. Now, I'm sure there will be exceptions to my rule or exceptions to my observation. However, the point is, a majority of the stories that were ran by the same tabloid and newspapers simply talked about how if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. In other words, doubling down on mistakes that were made. Now, this brings me to today's session, what I would like to put across as an antidote to what I think is the madness being given as formulas to younger women. I have said for many years that young women should start listening to men and listen less to women about certain issues about life. One of the reasons for that is, as men, wherever we are needed, we show up. If the country says we need you to die for us, men will show up to die for the country. The reason is because we place the country ahead of ourselves. We understand the duty that we have as men, and one of those duties is to tell the truth, not to lie, and when needed, to put ourselves forward to protect the next generation. You see, we do not inherit this world we have, this legacy we have. We do not inherit the life we have, what we call the soil, the legacy. It's not something we've inherited from our forefathers. You and I, we borrow what we have from our future generation. And this simply means that if we tell the truth, then we're guaranteed that the future generation would have good soil. If we tell a lie, then we're robbing them of the opportunity to even feed themselves. Most men who've been raised by good men have good intentions. Women, generally speaking, do not want to rock the boat because women run their logic through their emotions. Men do not. We can look at things and simply do a comparison between what is right and what is wrong, and we have always been able to change our minds. That's the reason why all of civilization was created and built by men. And whenever there was a civilization that became complacent, they got dominated, they got destroyed, they were overthrown. Because men, generally speaking, believe in legacy and longevity, about living into the future. I think it's important for young women to start listening to men, more so than they do women, especially on matters relating to women. I have no dog in the fight because I am a man, but what I can tell you is I can speak to you as you would be a daughter, a friend, a loved one, and I can tell you this: the rules of the game that you play as a woman are different to the rules of the game that men play. The rules are set by nature. Biology are the boundaries of that game. Step one is understanding what nature has said and what biology has decided to provide as limitations around the game. That's the first starting point. Within the boundaries, you can make whatever decision you want. But think long term. Think about what you would want. Whilst it's difficult in the present to know what you might want in the future, you have to know how to think and bring forward your future self to the present self and allow both to negotiate on what the right decisions would be. In the present, you want gratification for your needs today. So if you are 20, as a 20-year-old woman, you're thinking about what you want right now. But if you add 20 years to 20 is 40, and imagine yourself at 40 years. Allow that 40-year-old self to come back into the present and have a dialogue with you, where both of you are saying, well, both of our needs have to be met. But at some point, the 20-year-old of you will die and emerge into the 40-year-old self. You die to your old self every day. As a matter of fact, the human body is renewed every 6 months. You're not the same person twice every year. And that simply means that you have to make decisions in the present, taking into account what your future self and your potential could be. Now, this simply means that nature and biology are not things to believe that technology will supersede. It will enhance, it will augment, it will support, but it will never replace nature or biology. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that will prevail. A lot of young women have all these great plans, but they haven't stopped and said, but what is the ultimate purpose of everything that I am pursuing? So I have ranted for half an hour. Let me leave you with my thesis. Now, you may be thinking, give us a solution. You've been talking, give us a solution. Well, here are some solutions. The solutions I offer, I call them tenets. The tenets apply equally for men with subtle variations. But let me speak to the women. And I'm going to give you some tenets based on numbers. Numbers do not lie. Numbers have integrity, which is why we call numbers and alphabets, we call them characters, because they're whole, they're they have integrity, and you cannot change them. One will always be one, irrespective of how you feel. So here are some numbers to help you, to guide you, and perhaps to allow you to reason and disagree with my position. For the average woman, your value begins from the moment you're born. For the average man, his value begins from the moment that he is born. Before you're conceived, and I should make it clear, I have no intentions of trying to argue about when a life starts in the womb. I'm talking about, you can include that if you want to, you can exclude that if you want to. I have no issues or dog in that conversation. But let's start with the position of you actually being born into the world. You have what we call an intrinsic value. You also have, as you age, what we call a relative value. As an individual, you're part of the social fabric, and therefore the decisions you make will be influenced by your environment, your goals, your dreams, your association, the pain you've had, the experiences you've had, even what has been planted in your subconscious mind before the age of reason, before you're able to think. In any case, what you're looking for is to recognize that you start from the day you were born and you play a game until the day you die. That game you're playing comes with its goods and its bad. My father would say fat times and lean times. What you're looking to do is maximize your success ratio, minimize your failure, but also ensure you enjoy the process. So, prior to 18, we say that you are under the direction of a father, a mother, a loved one, a guardian. From 18, you become an adult. You're emancipated. You have 12 years. Your beauty and your youth has 12 years. That's an expiry date. 12 years. From 18, beauty lasts about 12 years. 18 to about 30. From 30, it starts to decline. Now, for some people, the rate of decline is slower. For some other people, it's accelerated. So between 80 and 30, you have some important decisions to make as a woman. That 18 years does not apply to men per se, because from time immemorial, from time started, men have been judged and viewed in a different way to women. From 18, women have more of what men want and desire, which is beauty, fertility, youth, and purity. As women age, those assets that they have, that value that they have acquired, intrinsically, just by being born, starts to decline. It deteriorates, it disintegrates, it dilapidates. Women are like buildings, just like men physically are like buildings. We are created, or we are born. We go through a growth phase, we mature, and over time we start to decline, and eventually we die. You can't change that. Men are more visual in our selectivity process, so we first have to see you before we hear you. But we're more aroused by what we see. Women, on the other hand, are happy to allow men to apply what we call the principle of compensation. If we do not have the looks, we compensate through hard work. We compensate by being a good provider. We compensate by being a good protector. If you go back to the hunter-gatherer days, a woman chose a man based on his ability to protect and provide for her, recognizing that she paid and made a much heavier sacrifice through childbearing, and therefore choosing the right man was important. That is still the case today. So most men are not only judged based on their looks. You will find women, as they age, would go for men who are not as attractive, can provide for them, are more mature, more stable, that have those archetypes of a good person, someone who will be there through the difficult times and through the good times. Now, I've used that as a base for what I intend to go into, and I'll do that very quickly. If 12 years is the expiry date of beauty, then it simply means if you're playing the game of odds, what you're hoping to do is provide yourself with the best chances of getting what you want, which means to draw and find, attract and retain the most attractive men or men, and consolidate on the best amongst the lot, recognizing that you're exchanging beauty, youth, fertility, and other values for what you want. Because men are naturally more visual, what you're born with, your intrinsic gifts, which makes you valuable, is what you bargain with. Your ability to maintain that value, sustain that value. For example, in buildings, we have what we call leasehold improvements for a leasehold building, which simply means things you do to the building, reinvestments in the building to maintain and reduce the rate of deterioration of the building. The same happens for women. The currency of exchange will vary. For some people, it's just beauty, youth. For some other people, it's fertility. For some other people, it could be non-intrinsic or non-sexual values, like how feminine you might be, your mannerisms, how well you were trained, whether you're a modern woman or a traditional woman, or it could be your earning potential. It doesn't really matter. The point being, in Jennifer Aniston's case, what we're talking about here is fertility. Now, I talk about the 4 ways in which men rank women to understand their value. Now, I should say this. In the marketplace, you're judged not based on your inherent intrinsic value as a human being. You are judged as a woman based on your relative value. Now, let me use a good example. Think about the home you live in, and let's just assume you were trying to buy a house. The intrinsic value of the house will be based on the fundamentals of the house, recognizing that what you're looking at is value in terms of cash flow or earning potential. So you will look at the house from the perspective of the cash flow the house can generate, the growth in that cash flow over time, and when that growth will come to an end. With that information, you can estimate what the present value of that house, based on its cash flow, its growth, and the risks associated with that house being in that location. That would be the intrinsic value. To get to that value, you have to have a lot of information, and you have to be good at doing the calculations. Generally speaking, most houses are not sold based on calculations. The value of the house could also be based on its replacement cost. How much would it cost to replace the house, to rebuild the house? That is another good guide. But in the marketplace, people do not use such fancy calculations. They simply use what we call a relative valuation approach, or comparison, a comparable approach. So we simply say, I'm buying this house. The house is number 8. But we know from the history that number 6 and number 12 and number 14 were sold 2 months ago. And then we simply say, what were they sold for? What is the size of those houses? What would be the price per square meter? We then apply that price per square meter by comparing it to other similar properties of similar architecture, of similar age, of similar type, in similar locations to the property we have an interest in. We call that relative valuation. So we value the property based on how it compares to other properties. Women are judged in the same way. Yes, you have a value as a human being. Yes, you have a value in the sight of God. Yes, you have a value to society. We have equality of rights. We have equality of opportunity. Yes, we're equal under the law. But in the sexual or the dating or the relationship marketplace, you're judged on a relative basis. And that simply means whether you accept or you don't, you're competing with another person. And every single day, there is a new 18-year-old that is born or that has come of age and therefore can compete. Men are born without, you could say, with potential, but without the similarity of inherent value as a woman, because society expects more from men. So a woman who is 20 years usually has a much higher value than a man who is 20 years old. Why? She has beauty, she has youth, she has fertility, and very likely, depending on where she lives, she might have purity, she might still be a virgin. Society assigns the highest value to what we call the virgin's price, a woman who has not been touched. A man, on the other hand, even if he's a virgin, even if he's good looking, even if he's fertile, is viewed by other men as just having potential, because men are judged by their ability to go out to the world and make something of themselves. In other words, go out there, slay the dragon, bring back the game, and then we'll assign you a value as a man. Therefore, the qualities that are needed to be able to go out and slay the dragon for a man take time to build. But once you have them, you're able to go out into the wilderness and slay the dragon. Because it takes time, for men, our value is usually the least the younger we are. But as we age, we convert potential to actuality, and therefore our value increases with time. Now, recognize that it's an exchange, and you need the currency of exchange. At 30, the same man has more to go back into the marketplace and exchange with. At 20, he says, all I have is potential. I can promise you that I will do everything I can to look after you, if you choose me as a spouse. At 30, he can say, well, I can show you my bank account details. I can show you the house where I'll be bringing you into. You will have half of what I have, and therefore you will be provided for and you'll be protected to the best of my ability. Potential cannot compete with reality, especially in the present time, because it's just about numbers. It's a numbers game. And what this simply means is that as a woman ages, she starts to lose what nature has gifted her. And what nature determines will be the only means of exchange, on the average, with someone of the opposite gender or a man of value. So, a woman has to get the thinking done very early, the planning done very early, and have key milestone dates to make sure that she's able to still be able to exchange what she may have left for the best available partner on the marketplace or in the marketplace. Guys, generally, we play a different game. We delay and delay and delay because it takes us a long time to become valuable. But the advantage we have is that as we age, now we can afford the virgin. We can afford the 18-year-old, the 20-year-old. A woman who is 35, 36, 37, 40 cannot compete in the sexual marketplace against a woman who is 22. You just cannot compete. From a position of attractiveness, youth, beauty, fertility, nature says you cannot compete. To do so is a fool's game. I cannot compete with my 20-year-old self in terms of youth, fertility, and beauty. That is just nature. At my age, I have deteriorated, dilapidated, disintegrated, so much so that I cannot compete with my 20-year-old self. I'll give you a good example. In my 20s and even up to my 30s, I used to be very active in martial arts. competing nationally, internationally, and world level. And I would go for training, long hours of training, train from about 5:36 till about 9:30 p.m. on a Friday, have a shower, go out to the club, having been battered and bruised, stay out in the club till about 3 in the morning, come back home, I'll go dancing, come back home, wake up at 6:37, haven't had only 3 hours of sleep, and I'll be very, very active. Today, if I don't get 7+ hours of sleep, I can't function. The reason is because my body cannot take the beating that it did at a younger age. I've been deteriorating. That's just nature. I don't fight nature. All I simply say is, well, how can I use it to my advantage? Perhaps I train fewer hours, I go out partying for fewer hours, and I try to sleep for longer hours. This is me working with nature. Now, what this simply means, and what I'm trying to get at is, at 18, you have important decisions to make, but you cannot make those decisions alone. This is where you need the structure of a man, a father, a loved one, a guardian, someone who can provide an overseeing role to help you make the decisions for the future intelligently and carefully. Now, least you think that my position to women is that you should give up your dreams and goals. No, I haven't shared my tenets, and I will start right now. From 18, you have a number of years. 18 to 22 is 5 years. Education. Most women generally choose careers that are not directly related to STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and maths. So most women generally have 4-year courses in universities. That then leaves you an extra year for travel. You have a gap year. You can travel the world and see the world and have experiences, and you spend 4 years studying. You have 1 year to play. At 23, you start your professional career. For 5 years, from 23 to 27, you put your head down and you work hard. You put men away from the picture. You do not commit to one man. You do not have babies for any man. You do not get married in that period, but you focus on your dreams, your goals, and your career. The 5 years allows you to achieve what I call your 10,000 hours of constant, continuous self-improvement, development, and practice. You're apprenticing under someone who is a master so that you can become competent in something. 10,000 working hours, assuming 2,000 work hours per year, would mean you need 5 years. So at 27, you've completed your education in flying colours. You've travelled the world for a year, and you spent 5 years, and you become competent, proficient in achieving your dreams and goals, and some level of independence financially. You've got to a position in your career, if you have one, where you're very competent. What that does for you is it allows you the opportunity not to be defined just as a mother or as a wife. You've had the opportunity to say, I am educated. I've had the opportunity to be around other men, so I understand how men think. I have traveled the world, so I've seen the world, and I know how things work around the world. I spent 5 years taking myself from graduate entry position to director position, to manager position, to supervisor position. I'm competent. I've given myself different stripes. I have the different faces to who I am. I'm a woman. I'm a businesswoman. I'm an entrepreneur. All of those help you form your self-image as a woman. But at 27, at the end of 27, you've achieved what I call full independence. Now you have a few more important decisions to make. You've wasted, or should not have used that word, you've invested 10 years in yourself. Your peak years you've invested in yourself, not another. At 27, at the end of 27, going into 28, my recommendation is that's when you should start considering serious relationships, mono relationships. Now you can start thinking about perhaps a trial marriage, moving in with someone for 6 months. Now you can consider taking someone seriously. Between 28 and 30, you have 3 years to get that decision right. At 28, if you were to meet someone, and you don't leave it till the end of 27 to start the process. You start dating before then, and maybe you've met someone for a year. So at 28, you can say, okay, I think you might be the right person. 6 months to live together. And in the 6 months period, you can actually see whether there is a possibility that both of you can cohabit the same space at the same time without killing each other. The idea should be for you to get married between 28 and 30. But more importantly, when you get married, you should ideally delay having children for at least 3 years. The reason being, most relationships fail within the first 2 years. So if you started at 27, you've known him for a year, you date him from 28 to 29, another year. In that period, you've lived together for 6 months, you can have a good understanding of whether you will have similarity in values, shared values of complementary skills, and whether you can coexist together. The mistake most women make is they have children as soon as they start dating, they get married, and then they realize it's not for us. So now they become single mothers or baby mamas, which is too big a risk. So 28 to 30, that's when you have to make the decision. There's no rush. As a matter of fact, in my tenet, you don't even have to have a child before 30. Now this would mean that between 18 and 30, the 12 prime years, you've actually had that to yourself. Now 30 is when you start thinking very, very carefully and seriously about children, if you want children. Let's assume you do. 1 should never be considered. You either have 0, 2 or more. Skip 1. There's no worse gift you can give to a child than making them an only child. Anyway, let's say you want 2 kids. You have the first one at 31, have the second one at 32. The youngest would need 3 years before they start any form of preschool. That would mean at 35, both kids are now ready for preschool. Even if that's on a part-time basis, you can get back to work. You get back to yourself. What that would mean is that you've only given up roughly 5 years of your life. You've only given up 5 years of your life. The first 12 up to 30, you invested in yourself. You didn't start having a child until 31, so you could say the first 13 years. 5 years, taken out from 31, takes you to 36. You've had all your children, and you've had all of them before high-risk pregnancy begins, 36. At the end of 35, women go into what we call high-risk pregnancy. The idea that women these days are not being taught about the importance of making that decision before high-risk pregnancy, doing the tests to make sure you have sufficient quantity of eggs and the flow, you have sufficient quality of eggs, is mental. Now what this would mean is at 36, you've had all your children. But guess what? The average woman lives until 86, 85, 86 as life expectancies in the UK. You have 50 more years ahead of you. You can pursue that dream, you can pursue that passion, you can pursue that calling, you can go into whatever you want to do as a woman, recognizing that you've allowed nature to work with you. You've achieved your goals, but you've not robbed yourself of something you might want, which could be a family. You've done all of that, and you have 50 more years to then pursue whatever dream you might have. Those are my tenets. Now, one of the things you understand is from my recommendation, I'm not suggesting that you have children or start a family before 27. I think it's wrong for young women in modern times to do so, with the exception of a few caveats. I can't go into those, but there are exceptions. If you live outside the West, that might work. Where there are still the traditional gender roles, that might work. Where the appetite for more is less, that might work. But generally speaking, 27 should be the minimum age for a woman to start a family, providing she has invested that time in education and her profession, so that she becomes something first before she becomes a mother. One of the reasons for that is because there is a correlation between the intelligence of a mother and how intelligent the child will be. The more intelligent a mother is and the more educated a mother is, the higher the likelihood that the children will be educated, more empowered, and therefore more successful. This is fascinating stuff. Therefore, you give the child the best opportunity by being your best self. You start raising a child from maybe 28 and above. With that, what you have, let's go back. You've had 13 years, 18 to 31, your best prime years. You dedicated that to yourself. 5 years, you dedicated to reproducing and a family. The remaining 50 years, you can dedicate that to your career, your profession, and being a mother, if you want to. Now, you see, what I have given you are numbers. You can sit down with a piece of paper and a pen, and you can argue as to why the numbers I've given you could be wrong. Maybe you might prefer 26 or 28. Maybe you might prefer, who knows, starting a family at 25. The point is that what I've done for you is I've brought in nature and biology into the picture. High-risk pregnancy begins at 36. That simply means, ideally, you should have made the decisions on childbirth prior to 36 to give you, the mother, and the child the highest chance of a healthy life and a fulfilling life. Doesn't it come across as being strange that a man is the one explaining these concepts to you? Now, I have met so many women, and I would say perhaps in my interactions with women, only 1 in 10 women understand what geriatric pregnancy is, or what high-risk pregnancy refers to, or when it starts. The reason is because most women have been told, you can have it all. Now, as a man, I cannot have it all. The advice and the advice I've given to you applies to men. I apply the same principles to men, but I change the dates very slightly. The difference is not too dissimilar. Ideally, men should have their children not too late, because we also have what we call high-risk pregnancy for men. The only difference is nature is more forgiving on men the longer we delay than it is on women. And interestingly, although men have their own aspect of high-risk pregnancy or delayed and perhaps less quality sperm, all a man has to do is procreate with a woman who is young. And that has a way of, I guess, you could say, providing a cushion to what would have been a poor decision on the man's side. A man who is 50 certainly is aged, but if he gets together with a woman who's 27, she has healthy eggs, quality, quantity. Even though his sperm may not be very healthy, the miracle of life still happens. Women do not have the same advantage. A woman who is 53, Jennifer Aniston today, cannot, except she decides to, try IVF, but she wouldn't want to settle down and get married to a man who is 24. That would be like, who knows, her, almost as young as what would have been her grandchild. In any case, the point of today's session is to simply say, the universe and nature cares about you, the woman. But nature has provided laws. We call them universal laws. Some of those laws affect the body. Those laws have been made known to your predecessors, your ancestors, and your parents and your grandparents. That information has been passed through the generation. And somewhere along the line, since the 1960s, that information was not passed down to the younger generation. A lot of the mistakes that are being made by young women today are avoidable if someone tells them what could be. If someone explains that their choices, although those choices are theirs to make, will come with costs. They will come with constraints. They will come with consequences. And therefore, there will be no solutions. There will only be trade-offs. And that as a young girl, you have to understand the trade-off you're making, but also recognize that at a younger age, it's easy to be dismissive of the future. It's easy to say, well, if I don't have kids, then it wasn't meant to be. At 53, you will be regretful. But you could have avoided all that pain, all that hurt. And let's just say for some reason, if you find yourself into being the Generation X, or Generation Y, early Generation Y, by early I mean closer to the 1980s than 1990s, it's important for you to look and do an inventory of your life and see how you can invest your life and the lessons you've learned in a younger girl. So young women today need to be guided. Young women today need direction, focus, structure, delayed gratification, a purpose, an identity. We have to start to encourage young women that the identity called motherhood or wife, in my opinion, is the greatest gift. Now, obviously, a woman might say, well, who cares about your opinion? After all, you are a man. I get it. But just imagine, I wouldn't have existed without the gift of a woman's womb, without the gift of my mother. Society has to look for a way to rebrand what motherhood really stands for and what being a wife really means. It's the highest honor. The honor of bringing new life into the world. Now just think about it. Think of all the great inventors and the great inventions and the great people that have inspired each and every one of us for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,000 years. Think about all the men and women that were born into the world because a woman made a sacrifice. The greatest sacrifice a woman can make. And the greatest honor a woman can have is not a job. It's not a career. Dare I say, it's not even motherhood. It's understanding your purpose as a woman. Understanding your calling, understanding your passion, understanding your calling, putting all of them alongside each other, recognizing what nature and where nature plays a role, and then making a decision that is consistent with you. In my experience, I've met women who never wanted to be mothers, and personally, in my opinion, should never have been mothers because they didn't have the calling to motherhood. Those women, I have found, have been the most happy. At 50, 60, 70, they were happy. Why? Because they always knew there was something inside. Now, there were some who thought that they didn't want to be mothers and then realized that they wanted to be mothers, but they didn't understand how to be good mothers. There's a separate category. The point I'm making is stay true to yourself. But before you make that conclusion and you rely on science, technology, invention, or the IVF, or whatever might be a derivative of the IVF treatment, stand back and do an analysis and ask yourself the question, are the risks associated with my decision, are they skewed positively or negatively? Is the cost and the benefit equally balanced? What do I gain in the short term? What do I lose in the long term? Finally, am I playing a game of chance, luck, or am I playing the game of odds? And do my decisions reflect the game of odds? And thus, am I choosing something that is probable based on numbers, or am I choosing something that is possible based on hope? Now, I hope your decisions, if particularly you are a young woman, will either reflect or mirror some of the conversations that we have had or shared. On the other hand, if you've made your decision already and you decide, my career, my job is more important, I hope, and this is a call to action from my part to you, I hope that should you come to that Damascus moment when the scales fall off your eyes, when you realize and see the bright light and the errors of your ways, if any, I hope that like Jennifer Aniston, you do not make the mistake of saying that you have no regrets. I hope you actually acknowledge your regrets, but take that emotion and become a teacher and reinvest your lived life, the decisions you made, in younger women, and guide them. Be there to guide them. One of my favorite books, as I close, is the Bible. For a number of reasons. Primarily, there are some great stories. Whether you believe the Bible to be a fiction or non-fiction book is irrelevant. Parables, allegories, aphorisms, stories, you can group all of those into two sides of a ledger. People who are good examples, whose lives and whose stories inspire us, motivate us, makes us infer on how to live life. People whose lives we're asked to emulate. We also have on the other side of the ledger, people whose lives were despicable. They serve as warnings, things we should avoid, people we should avoid trying to become. So what you have across 66 books, stories that show you the difference between a good example and a poor example, a life well lived and a life perhaps that could have been lived differently. The author of each of the stories calls you to use your imagination, to visualize, to pre-play the future, to use your memory to redraw the stories from the books, and then to decide in the present which pathway you get to choose. Again, this is your masterpiece, this is your life, this is your story, so you can choose whichever you want. One of the reasons I do these and have these conversations is because I have known over my life, I have made poor decisions, and there are things that I would not want other young boys to emulate. But I know there are things that I have done right that I would want younger people to emulate, irrespective of where you find yourself. Once you've taken the opportunity to go through the experience of life, reflect or infer from the results you've achieved, make the course corrections. That is progress. Now, part of that course correction and progress comes from reinventing your life in another. And whatever your decision as a woman or a man, I wish you all the best.